On September 16, the news of Robert Redford's passing left the entire world in shock and sorrow. In the final weeks of his life, he began to open his heart to his wife, Sibylle Szaggars, the woman who had stood by his side for 3 decades. But Redford did not speak about a will or his massive fortune. Instead, he confided his most intimate wishes for his family, for his firstborn son, who had passed away too soon, and for a peaceful world he had always dreamed of. What made a film? Throughout a career spanning more than half a century, Robert Redford carved his name into Hollywood history with a series of iconic roles: the sly gambler in The Sting, the charming outlaw in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and the romantic man in Out of Africa. He was not only an A-list actor, but also an Oscar-winning director and the founder of the Sundance Film Festival, which became a launching pad for countless generations of young talent. Yet, behind the dazzling lights was a completely different Redford. He lived quietly, choosing to stay close to nature and retreat in a wooden house amidst the Utah mountains. Far from the glitz of Los Angeles, as old age crept in, Redford gradually withdrew from public life. In his final days, he no longer thought about film sets or red carpets, but simply found peace beside Sibylle Szaggars, and after his passing, it was she who revealed the secrets he had confided. 1. Hoping his children would live a peaceful life, free. Redford always wished for his children and grandchildren to live as ordinary people, not swept away by fame and not crushed by the shadow of their father. He once told them, "Live as simple a life as people." In Redford's heart, he held a longing. The whole family going camping together, sitting around the fireplace, listening to the crackling wood in the Utah forests. That is why Redford created a safe haven for his children and grandchildren to grow up, surrounded by nature, untouched by paparazzi. Perhaps it was because of this that Redford never stopped yearning for life. For amid the losses, he still held another silent wish: music, too. Passing away quietly without appearing in the press. "I don't need to be remembered for any scandals," Redford gently told his wife and children. "I only hope that if someday people mention me, it will be for the films, the forests, and the values I've tried to nurture all my life." In an earlier conversation, Redford had made it clear that he only wanted to be remembered for the work, for the craft, and spiritual legacy, not for fame or hollow awards. To him, all that glitter was just the outer shell of an artist. Red's final wish was to leave this world gently, without ever appearing in the headlines of tabloid newspapers. And indeed, when this legend passed away, the public learned almost nothing beyond the fact that his family read the desire to live longer and continue working. Redford never considered age an excuse to stop, even past the age of 80. He regularly appeared before the camera, continued directing films, and still devoted time to nature and family. To him, the concept of retirement was almost meaningless. He once shared, "Retirement means stopping or giving something up. But why stop when life is still ahead of you and you still have the strength to live it fully?" Redford's simple yet powerful wish was to live a long life so he could continue doing what he loved, telling stories through film and spending time with those he cherished. For him, work was life, and as long as he could, he wanted to keep for an unending grief for his firstborn son. The greatest pain of Robert Redford's life lay within his own home. His firstborn son had died just a few months after birth, due to sudden infant death syndrome, SIDS. He once confided to his wife that he often wondered if the boy had lived. What would he be like? Would he walk, smile, or look like me or you? Every time he watched his other children grow, Redford's heart would ache, wishing he could have seen his first child grow up. That was why he constantly reminded his children, cherish every moment of being alive, because not everyone is lucky enough to grow up. And when speaking of his artistic journey, Redford often mentioned a very special place, the home he had carefully built. Music 5. Protecting Sundance as the eternal home of independent cinema. Redford often referred to Sundance as his spiritual child. He never saw it as his personal possession, but as a common home. "Sundance is not mine. It belongs to the young artists." What he feared most was the day Sundance would be consumed by commercialism. When box office numbers would overshadow creativity, Redford hoped that future generations would continue to protect Sundance's soul, a fertile ground for daring films, stories that challenged conventions, and young artists bold enough to dream and take risks. To him, Sundance had to remain a place where cinema was made from the heart, not merely for profit. And in preserving Sundance, Redford became even more troubled by what legacy he would leave behind. 6. Not allowing his legacy to become an auction item. According to his wife, Redford never saw his legacy as money. He viewed each painting, diary, entry, or collection as the very breath of a person's life. He hoped they would remain as living mementos in his Utah log cabin rather than being turned into luxury goods on an auction floor. For Redford, their true value lay in the stories, the memories, and the love he instilled in them so his children and grandchildren could continue to feel and cherish them instead of treating them as assets to be spent. When he spoke of his legacy, his eyes would light up because beyond all personal mementos, Redford also held a great aspiration. 7. The dream of a beautiful nature and wildlife preservation. Robert Redford purchased more than 10,800 acres of land, around Sundance to protect forests and mountains. He once said, "If I don't do it, who will?" Even in frail old age, he still wished to preserve the beloved wilderness and forests. Redford and his family pledged to conserve over 860 acres within the Redford Family Nature and Wildlife Preserve, located in Sundance's North Canyon. In 2020, he also placed 360.5 acres at Elk Meadows under a conservation easement to protect wetlands, grasslands, and wildlife habitats. At Sundance Mountain Resort, he established a principle of limited development: develop less, preserve more. This became the guiding rule that allowed the land to remain intact with nature despite commercial pressures. Yet even then, when he spoke of nature, Redford often mentioned something seemingly unrelated: people. And after his passing, it was aid empowering indigenous artists. According to his wife, Robert Redford was very close to Native American communities. He not only collected their art but also supported young directors and artists. For Redford, Native art was never just decorative. From early on, he collected Navajo rugs, Anastasi pottery, and Kachina dolls. He wanted those works not to sit lifeless behind glass, but to be felt and understood. Through the Sundance Institute, Redford created opportunities from film making to telling their own stories to sharing identity and history by producing The Dark Wind and supporting Dark Winds. These projects helped indigenous people reclaim their voices on the big stage. Redford hoped that when audiences saw his collection, they would not only see beauty, but also feel the resilience, pride, and pain of a culture. To him, empowering indigenous artists was not charity, but a responsibility, a cultural justice, and an inseparable part of the legacy he left behind. Someday, people mention me. It will. But Redford did not stop at giving back a voice to indigenous communities. Deep inside, he nurtured an even greater dream, one that transcended borders and ethnicities. In Spirit 9, A World of Peace Without War, Robert Redford once told his wife and children that he wished for a world without war. He wanted his descendants to grow up in a just society where indigenous people were respected as part of historical heritage. He believed that art was the medicine that healed wounds, and it was never tied to war or violence. He repeatedly spoke out about the necessity of social justice, especially for marginalized communities and Native peoples. He felt society was becoming increasingly divided and needed to be healed with compassion and by listening to voices often ignored. He hoped his legacy would not just be the glitter of the silver screen, but a reminder that each of us bears the responsibility to choose the path of justice and peace. For Redford, the longing for peace was not merely about ending wars. In his final day, 10, humanity must step out of its dependence on oil and turn toward clean energy. In the mid-1970s, when Hollywood was still consumed by neon lights and lavish parties, Robert Redford was already looking towards something. If you paid attention to The Sun and the Wind, he began speaking about clean energy at a time when the concept was still unfamiliar, even ridiculed as a fanciful dream. In an article, many years later in the Huffington Post, Redford admitted that he was too early with solar energy, because at that time policy wasn't ready, and the public considered it pure fantasy. But Redford did not give up. He used cinema itself, his most powerful language, to sow the seeds of change. In 1975, he collaborated with legendary designer Saul Bass to produce the Solar Film, a short film introducing solar energy. Redford continued to dedicate his voice and wealth to investing in renewable energy. He joined environmental campaigns working with organizations like the NRDC to block coal plants from being built in the butt. Even while fighting for clean energy and the environment, Redford never forgot another battlefield to which he had been